I wasn't supposed to be here. Not an inchin. Not in this suffocating black uniform with the stiff collar that felt like hands around my throat. Not standing outside a compound so large it had its own zip code, holding a crumpled employment letter and trying to convince myself this was a good idea. It wasn't a good idea, I knew that. But my grandmother's hospital bills didn't care about my feelings. My name is Seo Jihan, 23 years old, Omega, former university student, in a current unemployed disaster, and as of this morning, the newest domestic servant of the Kwon Yu household. Yes, that Kwon Yu household, as in Kwon Seojun and Yoo Taeyang, the two most feared mafia bosses in all of South Korea, who also happened to be engaged to each other. Their upcoming marriage wasn't just a romance, it was a merger. Two criminal dynasties folding into one empire so powerful that even the government whispered their names carefully. And I, Seo Jihan, she was about to clean their floors. Fantastic. The head of household staff, a wire-thin man named Baek Chan-soo, met me at the Iron Gate with the energy of someone who hadn't slept in 3 years and blamed everyone for it. He looked me up and down like I was a stain on a white shirt. "You're younger than I expected," he said. "And you're friendlier than I expected," I replied. "We're both disappointed. Can I come in?" His left eye twitched. I filed that away as a personal victory. When the compound was, and I say this with full sincerity, ridiculous. Not beautiful in the way that felt welcoming. Beautiful in the way that reminded you that you own nothing and never would. Black stone floors that reflected the ceiling lights like still water. Corridors so wide you could park a car in them. Art on the walls that probably cost more than my entire neighborhood. Shan-soo walked fast and talked faster, rattling off rules the way someone reads terms and conditions. No eye contact with the masters, no speaking unless addressed, no lingering in private corridors, absolutely no touching anything in the East Wing without direct instruction. I nodded along, smiling pleasantly. I was definitely going to touch things in the East Wing. See, here's what Shan-soo didn't know about me. What nobody knew, actually, because I had spent the last 6 years making sure of it. I have psychometry, not the ability to read the emotional history of objects and people through physical touch. One hand on a door frame, and I feel every argument that ever happened in that hallway. One brush of fingertips against a coffee cup, and I taste the loneliness of the person who last held it. It sounds like a gift. It is also genuinely exhausting. I wore thin gloves whenever I could get away with it. Shan-soo had already given me a look about them when I shook his hand at the gate. I told him I had sensitive skin. He didn't believe me. I didn't care. My first assignment was simple. Deliver afternoon tea to the main sitting room where both masters were reportedly reviewing documents. Simple, routine, nothing to worry about. I picked up the tray, kept my gloves on, and followed the directions Shan-soo had practically barked into my skull. I heard them before I saw them. Not arguing, not talking loudly, just present. The air near that sitting room felt different, heavier, like the atmosphere itself was aware that the two men inside it required a different quality of oxygen. I pushed the door open with my elbow, tray balanced in both hands, eyes appropriately lowered the way Shan-soo had drilled into me approximately 11 times in 20 minutes. "Afternoon tea," I announced. Professional, calm, totally unbothered. I made it exactly 4 steps into the room before I felt it. The tray was fine, my hands were steady. But the edge of my left glove snagged on the ornate tray handle as I leaned forward to set it down, and the glove pulled back just enough, just a fraction. My bare fingertip grazed the surface of the low table, and the room exploded inside my head. Not literally, but to me it felt that way. Flashes of emotion hit me like a wave. Cold fury, exhaustion, something aching and wordless that felt like loneliness wearing a very expensive suit. I yanked my hand back, steadied myself, and blinked 3 times fast the way I always did to shake loose a reading. When my vision cleared, I became aware of 2 things simultaneously. The tea tray had not fallen. Good. Both men were staring at me. I slowly raised my eyes. The one on the left was Kwon Seojun, 28, dark eyes, sharp jaw, the kind of face carved to make people nervous. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately name. Not quite suspicion, not quite curiosity, and something between the two that felt like the beginning of a question he hadn't decided to ask yet. The one on the right was Yoo Taeyang, 29, broader shoulders, a scar above his right brow, eyes the color of deep water before a storm. He wasn't looking at my face, he was looking at my hands. The silence stretched 4 full seconds. "You're new," Kwon Seojun said. "Technically, I've been alive for 23 years, I said. "But yes, new here." Yoo Taeyang blinked. Kwon Seojun's jaw shifted exactly once, and somewhere in the compound, a door closed, and I had the distinct, stomach-dropping feeling that I had just made two very dangerous men notice me. I was so going to get fired. That thought sat in my chest like a swallowed ice cube as both men continued staring at me with the focused energy of two people who were not accustomed to being caught off guard by anyone, let alone a servant who had been employed for approximately 11 minutes. I should have apologized. Lowered my eyes. Done the whole respectful bow and quiet exit that Shansu had rehearsed with me like a nervous theater director before a show. Instead, I stood there. Because here is the thing about psychometry that nobody tells you. When you accidentally read a room that powerful, your body needs a second to remember which emotions are yours and which ones you just absorbed. And what I had pulled off that table was not mild. It was not the background hum of two men having a productive afternoon. What I felt in that half-second of contact was this. Seojun's emotional signature was cold in the way that deep water is cold. Not empty, pressurized. Like something enormous was being held very still by sheer force of will. There was discipline in him that bordered on grief. Taeyang's was different, sharper, restless. The feeling of a man who woke up every morning and had to consciously decide not to burn something down. And underneath both of them, woven so quietly I almost missed it, was something they shared. A tiredness, not physical. The kind that comes from performing a version of yourself for so long you forget what the original felt like. I recognized that feeling. I lived in it. It was the loneliest thing I had ever touched. So yes, I needed a second. Is there something wrong with your hands?" Taeyang asked. His voice was lower than I expected, unhurried. The kind of voice that did not need volume because the room already knew to listen. "Nothing wrong," I said. "Sensitive skin. The gloves help." "You snagged one on the tray." "I noticed. Thank you for the update." Seojun made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something shorter than that. More like his throat decided to react before his face could stop it. Taeyang's eyes moved from my hands to my face. He had a way of looking at someone that felt like being measured for something you hadn't agreed to be measured for. I met his gaze directly because looking away felt like losing something, and I had not come to Incheon to lose things. "You're not nervous," Seojun said. It came out less like an observation and more like an accusation. "I'm extremely nervous," I said honestly. "I'm just not going to perform it for you." It seems like a waste of both our time. The silence that followed that sentence was the specific kind of silence that could either end with someone being escorted off the premises or with something shifting permanently. I genuinely could not tell which direction it was leaning. Seojun tilted his head exactly 2 degrees. "What's your name?" "Seo Jihan, sir." "How old are you, Jihan?" 23. Something moved through his expression at that. Quickly. He'd gone before I could read it without my ability, which I was absolutely not using again in this room because my nervous system needed to survive the rest of the day. Taeyang leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He had the posture of a man who had decided something and was waiting to see if the world would catch up to him. "Where did they find you?" "The staffing agency in Seoul. I have a letter of placement if you'd like to review it." "I don't need to review it," he said. "Washa, I'm asking about you, not the paperwork." That landed differently than I expected it to. There was nothing inappropriate in the way he said it. Nothing that should have made my pulse do what it did. It was just a sentence, a simple question. But it was the first time since I had walked through that gate that someone in this compound had asked about me, like I was a person rather than a task to be processed. I kept my expression neutral through years of practice. "I'm from Seoul. I took this position to support my grandmother. I'm good at my job and I don't create problems." "You talked back to me twice in under 5 minutes," Seojun said. I answered your questions honestly. If that counts as talking back, this household has a communication problem that predates my arrival. Taeyang looked at Seo Jun. Seo Jun looked at Taeyang. Something passed between them in that look. Fast and private, the way conversations between people who have known each other a long time tend to travel without words. Then Seo Jun looked back at me and said, "You can go." I bowed, turned, and walked toward the door with every muscle in my body screaming at me to move normally and not rush. I was one step from the doorway when Taeyang spoke again. "Jihan." I stopped, did not turn around immediately, gave myself exactly one breath. Then I looked back over my shoulder. His eyes were already on me, had probably not left me. "Don't lose the gloves," he said quietly. "You'll need them here." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. He knew. He didn't know how. He couldn't know what. But something in Yoo Taeyang had recognized that I was not entirely ordinary. And then the worst part, the part that followed me all the way back down that corridor, was that he didn't look alarmed. Phone he looked interested. I turned back around and walked out of that room before my face could betray me. The corridor swallowed me whole, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time since I had entered the compound. My gloved hand pressed flat against the cool wall, and I stood there for exactly 3 seconds, collecting myself like scattered papers in a wind. "Don't lose the gloves." He said it like a warning, like he was doing me a favor, like Yoo Taeyang, who was one half of the most feared criminal partnership in South Korea, had looked at a brand new servant boy and decided in under 4 minutes that something about him was worth protecting. I did not know what to do with that. So I did what I always do when something confuses me. I filed it under "deal with this later" and went back to work. Shansu found me in the East Corridor 17 seconds after I emerged from the sitting room. I was convinced he had a tracking device embedded somewhere in the uniform. "How did it go?" he asked, studying my face with the intensity of a man trying to read weather patterns. "Fine," I said. "Tea was delivered. No one died." He stared at me. "That's a very specific thing to say." "It's a very specific household." He made a sound that was either a sigh or a small prayer and handed me a new task list. I was to assist with the preparation of the private dining room for the evening. The two masters had a meeting scheduled with a visiting associate, and everything needed to be perfect. Flowers arranged precisely, table set without a single centimeter of error, not a wrinkle on the linen. I got to work. The dining room was in the south wing, all dark wood and low lighting, the kind of room designed to make people feel both important and slightly threatened. I actually appreciated the aesthetic. It had commitment. There were 2 other servants already in the room when I arrived. One introduced himself as No Hyun-woo, a beta in his mid-20s with tired eyes and a genuinely kind face. The other was younger, maybe 19, a nervous Omega named Lim Daon, who kept his eyes on the floor and flinched whenever a door opened anywhere in the building. I watched Daon for a moment and felt something tighten in my chest. I recognized that posture. Head down, shoulders curved inward. Unmoving like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. That was not shyness. That was conditioning. "Hey," I said quietly, stepping beside him as we folded napkins. "You okay?" He glanced up at me with the startled expression of someone not used to being addressed gently. "I'm fine." "You flinched when the kitchen door closed. That's not fine. That's just polite lying." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I've been here 4 months," he said quietly. "You learn to stay small." "Why?" He hesitated, then just barely above a whisper. "There's an associate, not one of the masters. He visits sometimes. He has a temper, and he likes to remind the staff of their place." Hun-woo glanced over his shoulder toward the door before speaking. "His name is Shin Gi-yeon. He's a lieutenant under Kwon Seojun. He's been here twice this month already." I absorbed that, kept folding, kept my expression easy and unbothered, even though something cold had settled at the base of my spine. "Does either master know?" I asked. Hyun-woo gave me the look of a man who had asked himself that question many times. Whether they know or choose not to see it are 2 different things. I filed that under "absolutely deal with this later" and made a note in my head to keep both eyes open. The evening prep took 2 hours. By the time the dining room was finished, it looked like something out of a magazine, and I was deciding whether the centerpiece floral arrangement was slightly too far left when I felt it. A shift in the air pressure of the room, not metaphorically, literally, the kind of shift that happens when someone with a very particular kind of physical presence enters a space and the room adjusts around them whether it wants to or not. I did not need my psychometry to know who had walked in, and I kept my eyes on the flowers. You rearranged the centerpiece, Seojun's voice said from behind me. It was 3 centimeters off axis, I said. It would have bothered someone. It wouldn't have bothered me. Then it would have bothered me, and I'm the one who said it, so... A pause. Then close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him without any contact at all. You do that often. Fix things that aren't broken? I turned around slowly. He was closer than I had calculated. Not inappropriately close. Just close enough that I had to adjust my estimate of the situation. His eyes held that same pressurized stillness I had felt through my psychometry. Up close it was even more pronounced, like standing near something vast that had decided for now to be quiet. Only when they actually are broken, I said. Sir, the corner of his mouth moved. Barely, a fraction. And then footsteps sounded in the corridor, and Shansu appeared in the doorway. And just like that, the moment dissolved like sugar in warm water. Seojun stepped back and looked at the table. It's fine, he said to Shansu, already turning to leave. Leave this one on dining detail. He walked out. I turned back to the flowers and let out a very quiet, very controlled breath. Hunwoo appeared at my elbow. That, he whispered, has never happened before. What hasn't? Him complimenting the setup. He usually just leaves without saying anything. I looked at the doorway Seojun had just walked through, then back at the flowers. He didn't compliment the setup, I said. Hyunwoo frowned. What did he do then? I picked up my tray and headed for the door. I genuinely have no idea, I said, and that is what concerns me. If you are already feeling the tension building between Jihan and these two very dangerous men, you are exactly where this story wants you. Anya, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss out. I made it exactly halfway down the corridor before the evening fell apart. Not metaphorically, not slowly. All at once, the way things tend to fall apart in houses where power is the primary language and everything else is just punctuation. The visiting associate had arrived. I heard him before I saw him. A voice carrying from the entrance hall with the particular energy of a man who had decided long ago that volume was a personality trait. Loud, easy, the kind of laugh that expected the room to laugh with it, whether it wanted to or not. I stepped to the side of the corridor, tray in hand, eyes forward, doing my absolute best impression of a person who was simply part of the architecture. Shin Gyeon walked past with 2 men flanking him like punctuation marks. He was broad-shouldered, well-dressed, somewhere in his mid-30s with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once before arrogance settled into the features permanently. He didn't look at me. I looked at him, though, quietly, carefully. And then, because the universe has a very specific sense of humor, his arm brushed my shoulder as he passed. Even through my uniform, the contact registered. A flash, brief and hot, like touching a stove burner. What I felt from Shin Gyeon in that half-second was not coldness like Seojun, not restless heat like Taeyang. It was entitlement, dense and self-satisfied, the emotional equivalent of a man who had never once been told no and had built his entire interior world around that fact. I locked it away, steadied my tray, and kept walking. Dawn was waiting at the corridor junction, his arms full of extra linen. The moment he saw who had just passed, his entire body went rigid. He's here, Dawn whispered. Not a question. Already gone toward the east wing, I said quietly. Stay on dining detail. Stay near Hyunwoo. Dawn stared at me. You've been here one day. I'm a fast reader, I said, and kept moving. Dinner service began at 8. I worked the dining room alongside Hyunwoo, moving efficiently, keeping my hands occupied and my expression professionally blank. Seojun sat at the head of the table. Taeyang to his right. Shin Gyeon across from Taeyang. Already halfway through his first glass of wine with the enthusiasm of someone drinking on someone else's money. The conversation at the table was layered. Surface level, it was business. territory logistics, something about port access in the south. But underneath it, in the silences between sentences and the way eyes moved when words didn't, there was a negotiation happening that had nothing to do with ports. Taeyang didn't trust Gion. I could see it without touching anything. The way he held his glass, the way his responses came a half-second slower than necessary, precise and contained, like a man who was deciding exactly how much to reveal with each sentence. Seo Jihan, on the other hand, was unreadable. Perfectly. Professionally unreadable in the way that takes years to cultivate. I refilled water glasses and stayed invisible. Then Gion laughed at something and reached out to grab Hyunwoo's wrist as he passed, Honey stopping him mid-step just to redirect him to pour wine that didn't need pouring yet. It wasn't violent, it was casual. The kind of casual that is somehow worse than aggression, because it doesn't even register the other person as worth the effort of aggression. Hyunwoo complied without expression. I watched from the side of the room, and then Gion's eyes found me. You, he said, pointing with the hand that still held his wine glass. New one. Come here. I walked over, calm, measured. For that, he said, gesturing at a bottle near Taeyang's side of the table. Of course, I said pleasantly, reaching for the bottle. As I leaned across to pour, Gion said, loudly enough for the table to hear, they're getting younger with the staff. How old are you, boy? 23, I said, pouring smoothly. 23. He repeated it like it was funny. And already working in a house like this. Rough start to life. I set the bottle down, looked at him directly, smiled. Am I comfortable enough? I said. Thank you for the concern. Something flickered in his eyes. He wasn't used to that, the smile without the submission. Careful, he said softly. Just to me. The smile stayed on his face for the rest of the table to see, but his voice dropped to something that was meant to land like a stone. Houses like this chew through staff quietly. You want to last, learn your place fast. The table had gone slightly still. I became aware, with every nerve in my body, that both Seo Jihan and Taeyang were watching this exchange. I kept my eyes on Gion, kept my smile exactly where it was. Noted, I said, politely, clearly, with just enough warmth to make it impossible to call disrespectful and just enough steadiness to make it impossible to call afraid. Then I stepped back to my position against the wall. The dinner continued, but something had changed in the room's temperature. I felt it without touching anything at all. And when I glanced up exactly once, it was Taeyang's eyes I met across the length of that table. He was not watching Gion anymore. He was watching me, with an expression I was beginning to recognize. Not curiosity this time. Something quieter than that. Something that sat behind his eyes like an ember that had decided, without any announcement, to keep burning. I looked away first, but my hands hidden at my sides, we were no longer entirely steady. I held that stillness for the rest of dinner service like it was the only thing keeping me vertical. It mostly worked. By the time the plates were cleared and Shansu dismissed the dining staff, the compound had settled into that particular late evening quiet that large houses get when the people inside them are powerful enough that even silence follows their schedule. And I was stacking linen in the side pantry off the dining corridor when I heard it. Not loud. That was the thing. If it had been loud, I might have assumed it was something routine, something explainable. But it was quiet in the specific way that things are quiet when someone is trying very hard to make them that way. A sound, then a voice, low and edged, then nothing. I set down the linen. I should not have moved toward it. Every reasonable instinct I had, and I had several, it told me to finish my task, go back to the servants' quarters and sleep. This was not my house. These were not my problems. I had been here less than 12 hours and I had already made eye contact with 2 mafia bosses more times than was probably survivable. I moved toward it anyway. The sound was coming from the narrow corridor that connected the pantry to the back service stairs. I rounded the corner quietly and stopped. Gion had down by the arm. Not violently. Again, I am that specific kind of not violent that is somehow more disturbing than violence, because it is so comfortable. He was holding Down's wrist loosely, speaking to him in a low voice, and Down was standing with his whole body angled away, chin down, not pulling free because he had clearly learned that pulling free made things worse. Something in my chest went absolutely cold. Let him go, I said. Both of them looked at me. Gyeon's expression shifted through surprise and landed on amusement. Well, you again? Me again, I confirmed. I kept my voice even and my feet planted. Let him go, and we can all have a very peaceful rest of our evening. This doesn't involve you. He works in the same house I do. That makes it involve me. I looked at Dawn. Come here. Dawn looked between me and Gyeon with the expression of someone calculating which choice caused less damage. Then slowly, he stepped toward me. Watch Gyeon released his wrist with the deliberate ease of a man choosing to let go, rather than being made to. The distinction was loud even in silence. You have a problem with authority, Gyeon said to me. Conversational, almost friendly, which meant it was neither. I have a problem with specific applications of it, I said. There's a difference. He took one step toward me. I did not step back. You should be very careful, he said quietly. Swarty, about which battles you choose in a house like this. You don't know who is protected and who isn't yet. I know enough, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, the kind that didn't reach anything above his mouth, and walked back toward the main corridor without another word. I waited until his footsteps faded completely before I exhaled. Daeon grabbed my arm the second Gyeon was gone. Are you insane? He whispered. Ach, do you know who he is to Seojun? His lieutenant, I said. Hyunwoo told me. He's more than that. He's been with Seojun for 8 years. He has access to everything. If he decides he doesn't like you, then he doesn't like me, I said. That was already going to happen after dinner. At least now it happened for a reason worth having. Down stared at me. Then something in his face changed. Not quite relief. Something more fragile than that. Sunna, the specific expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for someone else to simply stand in front of them and mean it. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me. Go to the quarters. Stay there tonight. He nodded and disappeared up the service stairs. I turned back toward the pantry and walked directly into a wall that turned out to be Kwon Seojun's chest. I stumbled back one step. He caught my arm before I could hit the narrow corridor wall. One hand wrapped around my upper arm, and then we were both very still in a very small space with approximately 30 centimeters between us. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds. It was enough. Through the sleeve of my uniform, through my glove that had shifted slightly at the wrist, I caught the edge of his emotional current like a live wire. It was not cold this time. It was burning. Not anger, not desire. Something more complicated and more devastating than either. Yeah, the feeling of a man watching something happen that he recognized, in the deepest part of himself, as something he had needed to do himself and hadn't. He had seen the whole thing. He had stood there and watched me step between Dawn and Gyeon. And whatever was burning in him right now was partly shame. I pulled my arm back gently. He let go immediately. We stood in that corridor and looked at each other. That was reckless, he said finally. His voice was low, completely controlled. But the burning I had felt a second ago had not gone anywhere. Probably, I agreed. Gyeon doesn't forget. Neither do I. Something moved through his eyes, fast and deep, the way things move in water when there's a current underneath that the surface doesn't show. Go to your quarters, Jihan, he said quietly. Yes, sir, I said. I turned and walked to the stairs, and this time I did not look back. But I felt his eyes on me every single step of the way up. I did not sleep, not because I was afraid, though fear would have been reasonable. Not because my mind was racing, though it absolutely was. I did not sleep because the moment I lay down on the narrow bed in the servants' quarters and closed my eyes, everything I had absorbed through contact that day came back in sequence like a film I had not agreed to watch. Taeyang's restless burning, Seojun's pressurized stillness, Gyeon's hollow entitlement, and underneath all of it, that shared loneliness I had felt the first time I touched the table in the sitting room, the one that belonged to both men simultaneously, the one that had rattled me more than anything else because it was so quiet and so vast, and so clearly something neither of them had ever said out loud to another living person. I stared at the ceiling. You are a servant, I told myself. You are here for your grandmother's medical bills. You are not here to feel sorry for 2 mafia bosses who chose their own lives. The ceiling offered no argument. I put my gloves back on and eventually fell into something that was adjacent to sleep. Morning arrived the way mornings do in large compounds, not gently. Shan Su's knock at the servants' quarters door came at 5:45, and I was dressed and in the kitchen corridor by 6, armed with a task list and the specific energy of a person who had decided to be completely normal today. And the plan lasted until approximately 6:17. I was carrying a tray of morning coffee to the private study, which was now apparently part of my rotation, when the study door opened from the inside before I could knock. Taeyang stood in the doorway. He was not in a suit. He was in a plain dark shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows, and he had clearly been awake for hours. There were documents spread across every surface behind him, and the particular stillness of a room that had been occupied through the night. We looked at each other. "Coffee," I said, because someone had to say something. "I can see that," he said. "Would you like it inside the room, or would you prefer to continue conducting business in the doorway?" Something shifted in his expression. He stepped aside without a word. I walked in, set the tray on the only clear surface I could find. Hyun turned to leave. "Jihan." I stopped, turned around. He was leaning against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, watching me with that deep water expression that I was beginning to understand was not coldness, but concentration. He concentrated on things he found significant. I was apparently significant, which was a problem I did not have a solution to yet. "Last night," he said, "when with Guyun, I was doing my job." "That is not what that was." "Then I was minding my conscience," I said, "which technically I do on my own time." "You put yourself between a junior staff member and a man who has made grown soldiers nervous." "Someone had to. It didn't have to be you." I looked at him directly. "If not me, then who? Hunwoo, who has dependents and can't afford to lose this job? Down, who has been shrinking himself for 4 months just to survive the evenings? You?" The last word landed and stayed there. Taeyang went very still. "I saw you in that corridor," I said, and I kept my voice even because this was important, and I needed him to hear it clearly. "You were there before I was, and you didn't move." The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when something true gets said in a room, and the walls have to adjust to accommodate it. His jaw shifted. "Once." "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. You're not a man who misses things. You saw what Guillen was doing, and you calculated something before deciding whether to intervene. I'm not judging the calculation. I'm just saying I see it." Taeyang pushed off the desk and crossed the room toward me in 4 steps that were slow enough to not be threatening and deliberate enough to be something else entirely. He stopped close. Not the 30 centimeters of last night. Closer. "You've been here one day," he said quietly. "One day is enough to see clearly," I said. "Sometimes longer just teaches you how to stop looking." He searched my face, long enough that I had to actively manage my breathing. Then he reached out, slowly, deliberately, and placed 2 fingers against the back of my gloved hand. The contact was nothing through the fabric. He knew that. I knew that. That was not the point. The point was that he was asking, not with words, irony, with the specific gentleness of someone who had guessed at something private and was choosing to approach it carefully rather than demand it. My heart did something I refused to name. "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. "Seeing if you'll tell me the truth," he said. "About the gloves. About what you are." I looked down at his fingers resting on my hand, then back up at him. "Not yet," I said honestly. He nodded slowly and dropped his hand. "Fair enough," he said, like he had all the time in the world, like he had already decided he would wait, which was genuinely so much more dangerous than pressure would have been. I picked up the empty tray and walked to the door. "Taeyangsi," I said without turning around. "Yes, whatever you calculated last night in that corridor, recalculate it." I walked out, and I heard him exhale behind me, slow and long, like a man releasing something he had been holding for much longer than one night. If this story is doing things to your chest that you cannot fully explain, you are not alone, and you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell, because Neat Part is where everything you thought you understood about this story breaks open completely. Now back to the story. I made it to the end of the corridor before the first twist hit me. Not a vision, Not a full reading, just a fragment. The way psychometry sometimes works when residual emotion is strong enough to bleed through walls without any physical contact at all. It came from the direction of the East Wing. Seo Jihan. The feeling was not burning this time. It was fracturing. The specific emotional texture of something that had been held together by discipline alone for so long that the discipline itself was beginning to crack at the seams. I stood in the corridor for 3 full seconds, and then I turned toward the East Wing. I want to be clear that I knew this was not my business. I want the record to show that I said to myself out loud in a corridor of a MAFIA compound at 6:30 in the morning, "Jihan, do not do this." I did it anyway. The East Wing door was not locked. That surprised me. Everything else in this compound had a lock, a code, a guard, or some combination of all three. But this door opened when I pressed the handle and swung inward quietly onto a room I had not been assigned to and had absolutely no legitimate reason to enter. It was a private sitting room, smaller than the main ones. Personal in a way the rest of the compound was not, with books actually pulled from their shelves and left open, a jacket thrown over a chair back, a coffee cup on the windowsill that had gone cold. Seojun stood at the window with his back to me. He did not turn around. "When Shansu sends you to the wrong wing," he said, not a question. "Shansu didn't send me," I said. A pause. "Then why are you here?" I opened my mouth to say something professionally appropriate and instead said, "Because I felt something from this direction and I was worried." The silence that followed that sentence was the longest one yet. Seojun turned around slowly. He looked different from this angle in this light. Not smaller, that was not the word, but more visible. Like a room when someone finally opens the curtains and you see all the furniture that was always there, just hidden in the dark. His eyes moved over my face with an expression I recognized now from the accumulated hours of being looked at by this man. He was deciding how much to let through. "You felt something," he repeated. "I know how that sounds." "Tell me how it worked," he said. No preamble, no build-up. Just the direct question of a man who had apparently decided overnight that pretending not to notice things was no longer a productive use of his time. I considered lying. It lasted about 2 seconds. "Physical contact mostly," I said. "Objects, people, surfaces. I read emotional residue, what people felt in a place or during a moment. Sometimes when the emotion is strong enough, it carries without contact." Seojun absorbed this with the stillness of a man receiving a mission briefing. "When and last night, when I caught your arm." "Yes. What did you feel?" I met his eyes. "Shame," I said honestly. "Not about me, about the corridor, about what you saw and didn't move toward." His jaw tightened. "That is not a simple situation. Guillaume has—" "I know what Guillaume has," I said quietly. "I felt it off him too. He's protected, and he knows it, and he uses it. I understand the calculation, Seo Junsi. I'm not asking you to explain it." "Then what are you asking?" "Nothing," I said. "I came because I was worried. That's all it was." Something broke open in his expression. Just briefly. Just enough. "You were worried," he said slowly, like the concept was arriving in a language he was still learning. "About me. Is that so strange?" "Yes," he said, plainly, without drama. "No one in this house worries about me. They fear me or they want something from me. Worry implies—" He stopped. "That you're a person," I finished, "not just a position." The room went very quiet. Seojun crossed toward me in slow, measured steps and stopped close. Closer than Taeyang had this morning. Close enough that I could see the exact line where exhaustion had settled under his eyes from a sleepless night. He reached up and I held my breath. His hand came to rest at the side of my jaw. Not gripping, just resting. The backs of his fingers barely touching my face. Through the thin skin of my cheek, no glove between us this time. The reading hit me like a wave. Longing so old it had calcified. The feeling of a man who had built an empire and then stood inside it every day completely alone. And now threaded through all of it like light through a crack. Something new. Something frightened and warm and completely undone. Me. He was feeling that because of me. My breath left my body. "This is a terrible idea," I whispered. "I know," he said. His thumb moved once against my cheekbone. Yes, you're engaged to Taeyang. I know that too. And Taeyang, I stopped because I could not finish that sentence without admitting what had happened in the study this morning, which opened a door I was not ready to walk through yet. Seo Jun's eyes dropped to my mouth for exactly 1 second, then back up. Jihan, he said quietly. Don't, I said. Not yet, please. He searched my face. Then slowly, with a control that I could feel cost him something real, he dropped his hand. For a step back. And in the space between us, everything that hadn't happened yet sat like a held breath, enormous and inevitable, and terrifying. You should go, he said softly. I know, I said. Neither of us moved for 3 full seconds. Then I turned and walked out. And the fragment of emotion I carried out of that room with me was not loneliness anymore. It was worse than loneliness. It was hope. And hope in a house like this was the most dangerous thing I had carried yet. I walked back through the main corridor with the empty tray and the overwhelming sensation of a person who had just stepped into something deep and was only now registering the temperature of the water. My psychometry was still humming faintly, the way it does after a strong reading, like a tuning fork that had been struck and refused to go quiet. I needed to think. I needed coffee. I needed to seriously reconsider every decision I had made since arriving in Incheon. I made it to the kitchen, set the tray down, and stood at the counter with both palms flat against the cool surface, gloves still on, eyes closed, breathing the way my grandmother had taught me when the readings got too loud. In through the nose, out slowly, let the borrowed emotions drain back out of your body like water finding its level. It mostly worked. What did not work was the fact that Shansu chose that exact moment to appear in the kitchen doorway with an expression that meant something had changed. There you are, he said. You've been reassigned. I opened my eyes. I've been here less than 2 days. I'm aware. Master Taeyang made the request this morning. He said it with the carefully neutral face of a man who had decided not to have opinions about things that were above his pay grade. Not you're to assist with his private schedule. Documents, correspondence, daily briefings. Effective now. I stared at him. His personal schedule, I said. Correct. As in, being near him, specifically, every day. That is generally what a personal schedule assistant does, yes. I looked at the ceiling. The ceiling had nothing helpful to offer, same as always. And Master Seo Jihan approved this? I asked carefully. Shansu's neutral expression flickered for exactly half a second. Master Seo Jihan made no objection, which was not the same as approval. I noted that distinction and filed it in the growing folder of things about this household that were going to require careful navigation. Fine, I said. Where do I start? Taeyang's private office was on the 2nd floor, north wing, and it was nothing like Seo Jun's study. Where Seo Jun's space was ordered and deliberately composed, Taeyang's was organized in the specific way of a man whose mind worked faster than his filing system. Documents in precise stacks, but the stacks themselves spread across multiple surfaces. A whiteboard on the far wall covered in a network of names and numbers connected by lines I was not supposed to understand on my first day. I understood about 60% of it immediately. I did not mention this. Taeyang was already at his desk when I arrived. And he looked up when I knocked and pushed a stack of folders to one side to make space. Sit, he said. I'm staff, I said. I stand. You're going to be here for several hours. Sit down, Jihan. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat, because arguing with him about furniture felt like a waste of the energy I was going to need later. He walked me through the schedule efficiently. It was genuinely complex. 3 meetings, 2 of which required prepared briefings, and 1 sensitive communication that needed to be drafted in language careful enough that nothing incriminating could be read into it by outside parties. I listened, asked 2 clarifying questions, took notes. When I looked up from the notepad, Taeyang was watching me with that expression again. What? I said. You took notes in shorthand, he said. I think faster than I write longhand. Where did you learn that particular shorthand system? My grandmother. Unlike she was a secretary for 30 years. I paused. She's sick now. That's why I'm here. Something shifted in his face, softened, almost imperceptibly at the edges. What does she have? Her heart, I said simply. It's been struggling for 2 years. The treatment in Seoul is good but expensive. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet. The quiet of a man who was actually sitting with what he had just heard rather than waiting for his turn to speak. Kure, my mother had a heart condition, he said. Low, not quite casual. The tone of something rarely mentioned. She died when I was 19. I looked at him across the desk. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it without any performance at all. He nodded once, looked back at the documents. But something had opened between us in that exchange, small and careful, like a window with a broken latch that finally gave way to the right pressure. We worked in silence for a while after that. Comfortable silence. The kind that is only possible between people who have already said something real to each other. I was drafting the third correspondence when the office door opened without a knock. Seo Jihan walked in. He saw me at the desk immediately. His eyes moved from me to Taeyang and back to me with the swift precision of a man cataloging a situation in real time. Taeyang looked up. Seo Jihan. I didn't know you'd moved him here already, Seo Jihan said. When his voice was completely level, that pressurized stillness fully back in place, every crack from the east wing this morning sealed over. This morning, Taeyang said, equally level. I sat very still with my pen on the paper and my eyes on the document in front of me like a person who was absolutely not the subject of this conversation. We should talk, Seo Jihan said to Taeyang. We should, Taeyang agreed. Neither of them moved. With a silence stretched across the room and landed somewhere in the middle of the desk, approximately 6 inches from my left hand. Then Seo Jihan looked at me, not with coldness, not with the fracturing I had felt this morning, with something much more complicated than either. The specific expression of a man who had spent years being certain about everything and was now standing in a room where certainty had quietly packed its bags and left. Jihan, he said. Pin, give us a moment. Of course, I said, standing smoothly, gathering nothing, leaving everything exactly as it was. I walked to the door, and as I stepped into the corridor and pulled it gently shut behind me, I heard Taeyang's voice through the wood, low and clear. Say it, Seo Jihan. A pause. Then Seo Jin's voice, quieter, rougher at the edges than I had ever heard it. You feel it too. It was not a question. I pressed my back against the wall beside that closed door and closed my eyes. My heart was beating so loud I was genuinely concerned about the structural integrity of the corridor. Not because of what Seo Jihan said, not even because of what Taeyang hadn't said back yet, but because I had felt both of them, fully, deeply, without any buffer between their emotional truth and mine. And what lived inside those two men was not something manufactured by proximity or circumstance. It was real, which meant what was building inside me was real too. And that terrified me more than anything in this compound, including the armed guards and the man named Guillaume, who definitely did not like me. The door opened. I did not scramble away from the wall. I had too much dignity for that. I simply stood there upright with the expression of a person who had been waiting patiently and not listening through a door at all. Seo Jihan looked at me. Taeyang looked at me. And they were standing close together in the doorway, closer than the professional distance of two men in a business discussion, and something between them had shifted. Not resolved, but named. The way a storm becomes less frightening once you accept it is coming. Come back inside, Taeyang said. I walked back in. Seo Jihan closed the door. The three of us stood in that office, and for a moment nobody said anything, in which was fine because I was not sure my voice was going to behave itself correctly yet. Then Seo Jihan said, How long have you known? Known what specifically, I said. Because I have learned several things in the past 2 days that I was not prepared for. That he stopped, started again. That this was not one-sided. I looked at him, then at Taeyang, then back. Since the sitting room, I said quietly. First reading, I felt what you were both carrying. And I recognized it because I was already starting to carry it too. I paused. I want to be honest with you because I think you both deserve honesty more than you've been getting lately. What I feel for both of you is not the same thing. It is not the same shape or the same weight, but it is real for both of you equally, and I do not know what to do with that. Taeyang crossed the room toward me slowly. He stopped close and reached out, and this time he did not ask with 2 fingers on my gloved hand. He took my hand fully in his, glove and all, and held it. "We talked," he said, "Seo Jihan and I, about what this arrangement has been, what it was built on." He glanced at Seo Jihan briefly. "It was built on alliance, on practicality, on two men who respected each other, choosing the efficient solution over the honest one." Seo Jihan moved away from the door. His steps were slower than Taeyang's, or more deliberate. He stopped on my other side, and the specific warmth of having both of them near me at once was something I was not going to be able to describe to another living person without sounding like I had lost my mind. "The engagement was never about love," Seo Jihan said. His voice was quiet, not ashamed, just truthful in the way that things are when the decision to be truthful has already cost something. "We have been partners for 6 years. We trust each other with our lives. But what we had agreed to build was an empire, not a life." "And then you walked in," Taeyang said, looking at me, "and rearranged the centerpiece." "It was off-axis," I said weakly. Something broke open on both their faces simultaneously. Not quite a smile from Seo Jihan, more the precursor to one, the moment before the expression arrives, and from Taeyang, warm and real and completely unguarded. "Jihan," Seo Jihan said. Yes, he lifted his hand and placed it against my jaw the way he had this morning in the East Wing. Only this time Taeyang was watching, and there was no flinching from either of them. "We are not asking you to choose. We are not asking you to become something that fits into what we already built. We are asking if you are willing to let us build something different, something that includes you, not as a servant, not as a complication. Ours." The word landed in the center of my chest and stayed there, warm and enormous. I looked at Seo Jihan's hand on my jaw, at Taeyang's hand holding mine. "There is a man named Guillaume," I said, "who is going to be a problem." "Already handled," Taeyang said. "This morning after you left the office, I made 3 calls. Guillaume's conduct has been documented for longer than you have been here. He will be removed from this household by the end of today." I looked at him. "You did that after our conversation." "I did that because you were right," he said simply. "I had calculated when I should have acted. I am correcting the calculation." Something behind my sternum cracked open in the best possible way. "And the alliance," I said. "The families who expected this marriage between the two of you." "The alliance was between our organizations," Seo Jihan said. "It does not require our marriage. It requires our partnership. That remains." He paused. "Now what changes is who we come home to." I exhaled, long and slow and complete, the way I had not been able to exhale since I walked through that iron gate with a crumpled employment letter and told myself this was fine. This was just a job. This was not going to become the most important thing that ever happened to me. "I want to be clear," I said, "that I am still going to talk back. Regularly. That is not something love is going to fix." "We're counting on it," Taeyang said. Then Seo Jihan leaned in and kissed me, soft and certain, one hand still at my jaw. And it felt like everything I had read off that table on my first day. All that loneliness, all that longing, finally finding somewhere to land. When he pulled back, Taeyang turned my face gently toward him and kissed me next, warm and unhurried. The restless burning I had felt in him from the beginning finally still. I stood between them in the quiet of that office with my heart full to the point of embarrassing, and my grandmother's medical bills already handled, because Taeyang had quietly made arrangements 2 hours ago. I found out later, without saying a word about it. "You already paid for her treatment," I said when Taeyang told me, my voice doing something unsteady at the edges. "You came here for her," he said. "That matters." I pressed my face briefly into his shoulder and let myself feel it. All of it. The relief and the warmth and the terrifying, wonderful weight of being chosen by 2 people who had every kind of power in the world and used it to simply, quietly take care of what I loved. Seo Jihan's hand found the back of my neck, warm and steady. "Stay," he said. Not a command, the quietest kind of request. I lifted my head. "I was never leaving," I said. Outside the window, Incheon spread wide and bright under a late morning sky. The city carrying on with complete indifference to the fact that inside one compound on its edges, 2 of the most feared men in South Korea had just dismantled an empire's worth of careful plans for a 23-year-old Omega with sensitive hands and absolutely no ability to leave a crooked centerpiece alone. My grandmother would have laughed herself breathless. I smiled, and for the first time since I had arrived in this house, the readings that hummed at the edges of my ability were not loneliness. They were home. If this story wrecked you in the best possible way, you are my kind of person, and this channel was made exactly for you. Please subscribe right now and hit that notification bell because we have more stories coming that will make you feel every single emotion in your chest. Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite moment from this story. Was it the centerpiece? The corridor? Ah, the moment Seo Jihan said, "You feel it too?" Tell me everything. Share this video with someone who needs a great love story today. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching all the way to the end. I will see you in the next one.